The death and burial of Mary I. It could be argued that Queen Mary I's demise was a consequence of profound emotional anguish, although medical assessments suggest that ovarian cancer was the true cause. Her life was marked by persistent sorrow and disappointment. Mary's early years were characterized by the affection of her father, who regarded her as the treasured pearl of his realm. However, her idyllic childhood came crashing down with the arrival of Anne Boleyn, which led to her father's pursuit of an annulment from her mother. Mary staunchly opposed her father's divorce and his rejection of papal authority, believing that this rejection equated to a denial of her Catholic faith. She could not accept the idea that her parents had never been married, viewing it as a lie that would condemn her soul. As a result, she was cast out of court, separated from her beloved mother Katharine, and denied the opportunity to see her, even in her final days. Eventually, Mary succumbed to her father's relentless pressure, but their relationship was irrevocably altered. When Mary ascended the throne, she viewed it as an opportunity to restore the England of her childhood, a kingdom of enchantment and prosperity. She hoped her marriage would mirror the happiness that she had once observed in her parents' union, before Henry had seduced by Anne. In fact, she had romantic notions about her husband before they even met, envisioning a return to Catholicism that she believed the English people would eagerly embrace. However, her expectations were met with deep disappointment. By 1558, Mary had become a shell of her former self. Abandoned by her indifferent husband after 2 failed pregnancies, she was bewildered by the persistence of heresy she had fought so valiantly to eradicate. Ironically, a woman who revered the martyrs of faith failed to recognize why executing heretics did not yield the desired results. As she lay in her deathbed at St. James's Palace, silence enveloped her, her court having deserted her in favour of her sister Elizabeth, who was destined to become the next queen. This abandonment left a lasting impression on Elizabeth, who would later hesitate to name an heir, recalling how the court had turned its back on Mary in her final moments. With her strength waning, Mary's hours became increasingly filled with sleep and her clarity faded. Yet she managed to draft her will, and ultimately she could not bring herself to name Elizabeth as her successor, stating only that the throne should pass according to the law. Some speculate that she died of tympany, while others attributed her death to the heavy sighs of her sorrowful heart. Her council, noticing her sighs and eager to offer comfort, feared that she mourned her husband's absence. When asked about her distress, she replied, "That may be one cause, but it's not the greatest wound that pierced my oppressed mind," though she withheld the specifics. Mary had offered a lady's pious advice and envisioned angelic children frolicking around her, singing joyfully. Mary's illness prompted a nationwide sense of mourning, yet she bore it all with remarkable patience. She reassured those who grieved, sharing her dreams of angelic children and encouraging them to maintain a holy fear of God, which would protect them from evil and temptation. She urged them to understand that whatever befalls them is by divine permission, instilling confidence that God would ultimately turn it to good. Throughout her life, Mary endured constant trials, experiencing little joy, and save for her efforts to restore Catholicism to her realm. During her brief reign, she faced numerous conspiracies against her, fueled by malice towards God's truth. She commanded her council and servants to remain steadfast in the Catholic faith, and with her final moments spent in prayer, listening to spiritual lessons, and receiving the sacraments of the Church, she departed this world on the 17th of November, 1558. On the morning of her passing, she attended Mass in her chamber, a daily ritual that she never missed, even as death approached. Despite her condition, she participated with fervour and devotion, responding attentively to the priest's words. When the priest proclaimed the Agnus Dei, She clearly and reverently answered each invocation. As the priest prepared to consume the sacred host, she adored it with reverence, closing her eyes, and peacefully surrendered her soul to God. According to the Duchess, who recounted this moment with tears in her eyes, the last vision Mary experienced was of her Saviour, ensuring her a blessed transition to his heavenly presence. In reality, the last moments of Mary I were far from the grandeur one might imagine. She received her final rites just before midnight on the 16th of November 1558, and the last Mass was held in her chamber at dawn the following morning. After this, Mary slipped into eternal sleep, passing away sometime between 5 and 7 a.m. According to one account, her death was so serene that it went unnoticed for some time, leaving the exact moment shrouded in ambiguity. Once the news of her passing broke, the few remaining courtiers rushed to be the first to inform Elizabeth. Sir Nicholas Throgmorton, in his haste, removed a ring from Mary's finger. Reports vary on whether it was her coronation or betrothal ring, and presented it to Elizabeth as proof of the Queen's demise. However, he was disheartened to learn that the council had already conveyed the news, making his efforts redundant. Mary's body was entrusted to her local attendants, who prepared her for burial in a manner consistent with the practices of the time. As undertakers were not yet common in Tudor England, her physicians and household officers took on the solemn task of embalming her, providing their final service to the Queen. And unlike her mother, Katharine of Aragon, who had been embalmed by her chandler, Mary's own team carried out the procedure. Her surgeons carefully disemboweled her, removing her heart and lungs. The clerk of the spicery and the chandlers filled the cavity with spices and herbs before wrapping her body in cerecloth, a wax-coated fabric used for burial shrouds. Mary was buried in a nun's habit, though given her strong attachment to her husband, this seems very unlikely. The cloth-wrapped body was then enclosed in lead sheets by the sergeant plumber before being placed in a coffin covered in purple velvet and adorned with lace and gilded nails, an arrangement that Mary would have favoured. Following the customary practices of the time, her removed organs were interred separately. Mary's heart was stored in a silver casket lined with velvet and buried in the Chapel Royal of St. James's, while her entrails are thought to have been laid to rest at Westminster Abbey. In 1670, during the funeral ceremonies for General Monk, a royal vault was opened, revealing two urns, one belonging to Queen Mary and the other to Queen Elizabeth. Upon examination, Busby noted that the contents of Mary's urn resembled a red substance akin to mortar, but with less moisture than that of Elizabeth's. For over 20 days, Mary lay in state at St. James's Palace, surrounded by flickering candles, and Elizabeth ordered that the highest honours be given to her sister, mirroring the funeral rites conducted for their father, though with a significant difference. Mary's ceremonies were conducted entirely within the Catholic tradition, and her ladies maintained a constant vigil, praying at her coffin and offering masses for her soul. The funeral commenced on the 13th of December, with Mary's coffin adorned and placed upon the elaborately decorated hearse drawn to Westminster Abbey. A wooden effigy dressed in one of Mary's gowns and holding a sceptre, while wearing a crown, rested atop the coffin. Due to the rudimentary nature of embalming at the time, the effigy took centre stage throughout the month-long funeral, necessitating a lifelike representation. Elizabeth spared no expense in decorating the chapel for the service. The chapel was draped in black cloth, the altar was embellished with purple velvet, and a canopy of the same material was suspended above it. A hearse, square and surrounded by 46 massive candles, weighing 20 pounds each, was beautifully crafted with crowns and roses. Below the candles, a valance made of sarcenet bore Mary's name in gold letters, surrounded by a golden fringe. Within this valance, another layer of buckram with black silk fringe provided further decoration. The hearse was lavishly decorated with various symbols, and beneath it lay a taffeta majesty with gilded dome and the 4 evangelists positioned at each corner. The railings around the hearse were lined with broad black cloth, and the ground beneath was similarly draped. 15 stools covered in fine black cloth stood around the hearse, with purple velvet cushions atop each. An altar was positioned to the left of the choir, draped in purple velvet and adorned with church ornaments. As the chapel was meticulously prepared, the sergeant of the vestry was instructed to guard it until the royal corpse was brought down. Some accounts suggest that Elizabeth hinted at her displeasure if the court failed to attend Mary's funeral, leading to a grand procession that featured the highest nobles in the land. The Bishop of Worcester, accompanied by other bishops and the Queen's Chapel, moved to retrieve Mary I's body. While the chapel remained in the great chamber, the bishops entered the chamber housing the deceased. They censed the body and recited various prayers before it was lifted by 8 gentlemen. The procession was arranged in a solemn order, a cross followed by white branches carried by boys in surplices, then the chapel members, and finally the gentlemen, squires and chaplains of lower rank. Officers with torches lined the sides as the procession made its way. Then the overseers, earls, executors, and kings of arms. The body itself was covered by a pall of gold tissue, with a matching crown placed at its side. 2 noblemen, including the Marquis of Winchester and the Earl of Westmoreland, touched the body, while a canopy of purple velvet, supported by 6 gentlemen, sheltered it. The chief mourner, Lady Margaret, Countess of Lennox, was accompanied by the Earl of Huntingdon and Viscount Mornagh, with her train carried by Lady Katharine Hastings and the Vice-Chamberlain. Behind her followed 14 additional mourners, paired off, and then the other ladies and gentlemen, concluding with the guards. The funeral services were as elaborate and drawn out as customary for Tudor royals. At last, after the extensive ceremonies, Mary was laid to rest in the chapel built by her grandfather, Henry VII. The body was carried to the designated chapel for burial, where the Archbishop and other bishops conducted the final rites. As prayers were offered, 4 gentlemen, ushers, removed the pall from the body, which was then lowered into the grave, with the Archbishop casting soil upon it. Noblemen, including the Lord Treasurer and the Lord Chamberlain, broke their staffs over their heads and tossed the pieces into the grave as a mark of respect. Once the burial was completed, the Archbishop and bishops disrobed from the ceremonial vestments. Following the burial, the noblemen and prelates gathered, joined by the officers of arms. Garter, the principal king of arms, along with 2 bishops, announced a new queen, proclaiming, "Of the most high, most puissant, and most excellent Princess Elizabeth, by the grace of God, Queen of England and Ireland. Defender of the faith, God save the Queen Elizabeth." The noblemen raised their hands and caps in salute as trumpets sounded from the road loft. After this declaration, the attendees departed to the abbot's house for dinner. The extravagant ceremony cost over £7,662, a staggering sum, equivalent to millions today. Elizabeth insisted on this elaborate display, as any slight to a Tudor monarch would also reflect poorly on her own reign. Meanwhile, Mary's widowed husband, Philip II of Spain, expressed his sorrow in a letter to his aunt. He wrote to the Queen, "My wife is dead. May God have received her in his glory. I felt a reasonable regret for her death. I shall miss her even on this account." He instructed his representative in England to attend the funeral, ensure the collection of his jewels left behind during his last visit. Among these was La Peregrina, the famous pearl that he had given Mary on their wedding day, which would later gain fame as part of Elizabeth Taylor's estate. In her will, Mary requested that her mother, Katharine of Aragon, be exhumed from her modest tomb in Peterborough Cathedral and reinterred alongside her, with a proper monument to honour both. Despite this heartfelt wish, Mary had not taken steps during her 5-year reign to arrange for her mother's burial to be upgraded from that of a dowager princess. Could she truly have expected Elizabeth to grant Catherine the honours of a queen, given that Elizabeth's own legitimacy hinged on Katharine's denouncement. Ultimately, the tomb was never built, but that should not be taken too seriously. Elizabeth appeared to avoid creating tombs altogether. She never honoured Anne Boleyn with a proper marker for her unmarked grave beneath St. Peter ad Vicula, nor did she construct a monument for her father or her brother. Even Elizabeth herself did not have a tomb built until James I took charge after her death. Mary's grave remained unmarked for nearly 50 years, and accounts indicate that rubble from altars destroyed during the Reformation was piled atop her resting place. Upon Elizabeth's death, she was temporarily interred alongside her grandfather, Henry VII, until James could complete her grand tomb. Once finished in 1606, James exhumed Mary and placed her alongside Elizabeth. The tomb bears Elizabeth's carved marble effigy with her achievements inscribed in Latin along the sides. However, an inscription on the lower portion acknowledges Mary's presence. Partners in throne and grave, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary, sisters in the hope of resurrection. Both coffins were interred in the same vault beneath the chapel floor, with Elizabeth's coffin resting atop Mary's, once more placing Mary in a subordinate position to her half-sister. The historical memorials of Westminster Abbey recount that Elizabeth and Mary's tomb was opened once during the search for James I's remains. The excavations revealed 2 coffins within a narrow vault beneath Elizabeth's monument. It was evident that these contained both Elizabeth and Mary. The upper coffin, larger and shaped more distinctly like a body, was reminiscent of Queen Mary of Scots' resting place. Despite some decay, the area revealed the Tudor badge, a double rose, along with the initials ER and the date 1603 inscribed on the lid. This intimate vault, containing the 2 Tudor sisters, partners in life and death, was a striking contrast to the chaotic decay found in the Stuart vault nearby. Their resting place, serene and dignified, provided a stark reminder of the tumultuous legacy they shared. May they rest in peace while we walk the generations around their strife and courage under these restless skies.